Hey, how's it going? My name is Andy Monroe and welcome back to my YouTube channel. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about the pros and cons of throwing live events at resorts and throwing live events at convention centers. And this is a video I desperately wish existed when I first got into my event planning career, because I had no idea what to expect when throwing events at resorts or throwing events at convention centers. So I had to go into each venue with an open mind and no prior experience and learn those lessons the hard way. Yes, all the events ended up going well. However, there was a ton that I wish I knew beforehand, and I'm going to share all of that in this video. But before I get into it, make sure you hit the subscribe button and drop a comment below. As you can tell, this channel is brand new, so hitting the subscribe button and dropping a comment really helps my channel get out to more people. But also, I'm looking for content to make. If you have a video idea or a topic you want me to cover in these videos, make sure to drop it down below and I'll check it out. All right, with that being said, let's get into it. To start off on a positive note, I'm gonna go with the pro. The first pro of throwing an event at a convention center is that they have way more event experience. And this is pretty intuitive. This place is literally meant to throw events. And all they do in all of the rooms they have inside of that event center is throw events. So the people you work with, the staff that you meet, the partners that you meet, they're all gonna have a ton of experience throwing events. And this was extremely helpful for me since I was such a newbie in the event planning space, because I got to ask a ton of questions and learn from people who had been in the event industry for 10, 20, 30, 40 years. And some of the lessons they taught me changed who I was as an event planner. Since they have way more event experience, they're also gonna know exactly what to do for your event. When you come and present to them what you want to do, chances are they've already done it before. So they're gonna know who to call, who to bring in to make sure all your requirements are met, where to rig your points, where to put your stage, where to put your registration, where to put your food and beverage. They're gonna have all of that lined out, and it's really gonna save you a lot of headaches. The second pro of throwing an event at a convention center kind of builds off that first one, which is convention centers have great connections. Since they are so heavily connected in the event space, and that's all they do for a living, they have a ton of people in their network that are heavily involved and very prominent in the event space. So if you need somebody for audiovisual, if you need somebody for branding, if you need someone for food and beverage, if you need entertainment, if you need speakers, it's extremely likely that they will know exactly who to call, or at least refer you to somebody that you can work with. The third pro that I'm gonna cover in this video for convention centers is that they have really cheap room rental fees. And the reason for that is they just have way more rooms to rent inside the convention center. When you're renting from a resort, they really only have 2, 3, maybe 4 ballrooms that you can pick from. But most convention centers will have at least 12 to 15 ballrooms that you can pick from, along with massive exhibit halls and a bunch of other meeting spaces you can use. Now, these ballrooms and meeting spaces will vary in size, but most of them you'll be able to host your event in, especially if they have sections where you can put up core wall. You can really craft any room to look exactly how you want it to look. And since these convention centers have so many rooms and they're always being filled with events, they don't have to charge you that much for your event because they're making a ton of revenue everywhere else. Now, the final pro I'll mention today is that convention centers are large. The last thing you want to happen at your event is your attendees to feel claustrophobic and to be rubbing shoulders with everybody and have no space to move around. It gets all hot, it gets muggy, people get irritated, and that is the best way to disrupt the flow of your event. Luckily, like I said, convention centers are built for events, so they know that in the foyer area and even inside the ballroom, you're gonna need a lot of space. And they're gonna know exactly how to set your rooms to make sure that people have enough space when they're seated and when they're outside. And since they're so large, you also won't have the issue of competing with other events. That was my biggest fear when I booked out a convention center, because I was worried that there was gonna be an event right next door that was gonna be louder than mine, and it was gonna draw all the attention away from my event. However, these convention centers are so large that these ballrooms, these exhibit halls are all spaced out so far. It's like you don't even know another event is going on. So the space that you get when throwing an event at a convention center is definitely a pro. All right, enough with the positivity. Let's move on to the cons. The first con I'm going to talk about when throwing a live event at a convention center is that you typically have larger food and beverage requirements. And this is kind of a bummer because I said earlier that a pro is you get cheaper room rental fees. But another way they make up for that revenue is they make you commit to a large amount of food and beverage. Most convention centers I've gotten offers back from have given me food and beverage requirements from anywhere from $75,000 all the way up to $250,000. And that's a lot of money when you're already spending $50 to $100K on room rental fees. However, one negotiating hack I'll drop right now is that you can actually use this to your advantage. So most convention centers will lead with a low rental fee and a high food and beverage minimum when they're giving you a contract. But it's important for you to know that those rental fees go directly into the convention center's pockets. However, the food and beverage requirements, they have to pay the staff, they have to pay for the food. They really only get 20 to 30% profit on top of that food and beverage. So if you want to pay them a little less, have a little less liability in terms of food and beverage, you can just try to offer them a higher rental fee. So maybe they want $50,000 rental fee and $100,000 in food and beverage. Try offering them just $100,000 in rental fee if you don't know if you want food and beverage yet. Or maybe it's $75,000 rental fee and $25,000 food and beverage. That rental fee will go directly into their pockets, which means means it's more profit. This is definitely gonna take some negotiating and some number crunching, but just make sure you come up with a number that works for both parties. These venues wanna make money and you wanna throw an event for as cheap as possible. So use this knowledge of food and beverage and rental fees to find a happy medium. The second con of throwing events at convention centers is they only provide you the shell for the event. Now this was a big surprise for me. I thought I was going to get more when I was throwing an event at a convention center, but they really only give you the space. Everything else you have to contract out or you have to pay for, which maybe that was ignorant on me to assume that I would get some stuff included, but you even have to pay for the electricity and the air conditioning. Like I thought that stuff would already be on and we're just using the space, but no, if you're using that space, you have to pay for the air conditioning of that space. You have to pay for the electricity of that space. Every single chair costs money. Every single table costs money. If you want an outlet install, it costs money. If you want to have water towers in the room, sometimes it costs money. And this isn't really a bad thing because you get to develop relationships with contractors that help throw your event. However, it is a little bit more of a headache when you have to manage so many different people when planning your event. At the resorts I've planned events through, typically they have a lot of in-house staff that helps you out. But at convention centers, you're gonna have to learn how to work really well with tons of people because you're gonna be working with a lot of contractors. This leads me to my next con, which is you have to have contractors for everything. And I already explained this, but just to reiterate, when you book an event at a convention center, they're only gonna give you the shell. So you're gonna have to have contractors for every single thing that you need for your event. That includes registration, security, audio-visual, catering, branding, cleaning services, rigging, and every other role you have to fill at an event. And like I said, this isn't a bad thing because you get to have all these contractors in your network, but it definitely is a lot more work. The next con I wanna talk about is that it's good that they throw so many events each year, but it also could be a con because it means they might not care about your event that much. And that's just the harsh reality. When I got assigned my event planner, when I was throwing it at the convention center in Miami, that person was working like 2 or 3 other events the same weekend as mine. And I'm pretty sure they were working 100 events throughout the entire year. So when my event's a big deal to me, I come in there, this person could really care less. They're gonna check the box, they're gonna help you out in any way they can, but then they're gonna leave and they're gonna go work on the other client that they're working with in the other event space. And I completely understand they're just doing their job. And in reality, our event really isn't that important. There are thousands of events going on every single weekend, and ours really is not that important. But it is nice when you're at a resort, your manager is typically only working your event because they only have enough space to throw your event for that weekend. So all of their attention is on you. Up next for cons is most convention centers require you to use their union labor. Now, before I get canceled, I'm gonna preface this. I don't think union labor is a bad thing. I think union labor is great. However, it can be a con when you have to use their union workers when you already have workers on your team. What this means is that you're gonna have to shadow the people on your team. For example, we have an audio-visual partner that we work with for all of our events. And when we went into the convention center and through our event, the convention center union workers had to shadow all of the audio-visual guys that were working for us. And when they were shadowing, they weren't really doing anything. They were sitting around on their phones, just hanging out because all they had to do was be there because our guys were doing the work. And for our events, our audio-visual guys know exactly what we need because we like to create this big display. It's very customized. It's very personal to our brand. So I really only trust my audio-visual guys to get the job done. But the other union laborers still had to be in the room. And I felt bad for them too because I was wasting their time. They could have been out with their families or their friends or doing something else, but instead they had to just sit in the room while we set up for our event and while we ran the event. And you have to pay both workers, obviously. So you're really doubling your expense for labor. Now, like I said, I'm not saying I dislike union labor. I think it's really important. However, it's important for you to know when you go and sign a contract with a convention center that you're gonna most likely have to use their union workers to throw your event. Now, the last con I'll mention for convention centers is that the attendees aren't staying on site. And similar to pretty much every single thing on this list, you can look at it from many different ways. Yes, there are some pros for having attendees not stay on site. However, what I found with our events is it kind of hurt our show up rates because people will be at the convention center in the morning, but when they leave for lunch or go back to their hotel rooms for a midday break, they start to trickle in a couple hours after time starts in the afternoon, or they might not even come back at all. It's really nice to have everybody in one area because they can't really leave. And even if they do, they're only an elevator ride away from your ballroom. But at a convention center, they're gonna be staying at Airbnbs and hotels all around the space. So it might be like a 10 to 15 walk for them to get back to your convention center. And some people might not see that as worth it to go back for the second part of the day. And it's also a little confusing when people are looking to book hotel rooms for your event because a lot of people do expect there to be a room block at a hotel. And you might do that with a convention center, but it's really tricky when there's a ton of hotels around the area. Now, it is possible to do. We did do it with Fun Launch Live 2023, but looking back, I wish I would have had set up some sort of room block at a nearby hotel or some way for attendees to have a smooth room booking process. But just keep in mind, if you're throwing an event at a convention center, your attendees will be staying off site, so it might be hard to keep them in the ballroom the entire day and get them to come back when they leave. All right. Moving on to resorts. The first pro I want to talk about when throwing a live event at a resort is that attendees are staying on site. And I'm sure a lot of these pros are going to be ones that I kind of already mentioned earlier in the video, but this one's extremely important, so I'm going to talk about it again. I find for events, having your attendees staying on site is extremely important. And this is coming from someone who threw an event that didn't have attendees stay on site. When you're throwing an event, you're really creating an experience, and you're creating this energy that stays within the event throughout the entire week or the weekend or whenever you're throwing your event. And that is amplified when everybody stays on site. It's like you create this ball of energy, like this vibe of your event, whatever you're teaching, whatever your product is, whatever the message, the community, it feels like this energy is building throughout the entire week. But when people leave and go back to their hotels off site and come back, it really feels like that energy diffuses a little bit. And I felt in the room at the convention center versus the resort, the energy just wasn't as high. And it didn't feel like we created this community, this experience like we did at the events that we threw at resorts. And like I mentioned, it's so convenient. When you wake up in your hotel room, you take the elevator down and you're at the event. But if you're staying off site, you have to catch an Uber, or if you do a 15-minute walk, you have to go get your coffee somewhere. Most of the time our attendees would show up late, and I would feel terrible for that first speak because they would have to speak to pretty much an empty room. So if you're asking me, I think it's definitely worth it to have your attendees staying on site. The next pro I'm going to talk about is a room block. Now basically a room block is simply you committing to fulfill a certain number of rooms for your event. So the resort will block those rooms off so that your attendees can go book them. And they'll always give you a discount. And we've gotten discounts anywhere from 20 to 30%, all the way up to 50% off rooms. Now this is extremely convenient because it gives your attendees a simple and easy checkout process and an easy way to book rooms. What they'll do is they'll buy the ticket to the event, they'll get an email after from you saying like, hey, congratulations on buying your ticket, we're excited to see you. Here's the link to book your room. They go, they book the room, it's all done. When you don't have a room block, you leave that step of booking a room up to the attendee, and that just adds a little bit more friction to the process, which could even result in them refunding the ticket or not even buying the ticket in the first place if they know you don't have a room block. You gotta keep in mind that these attendees are flying from all across the country to come to your event. Buying a plane ticket, leaving their families and their friends for a couple days, taking time off work, but if you add in the friction of having to go and look at all of these other hotel rooms and they don't even get a discount, like they're already flying all the way across the country to your event, but they don't get a discount on the room, like that will make a difference. So just keep that in mind when you're planning your event. However, I will say with room blocks, there are a few risks. Number one, pay attention to cutoff dates. Some resorts will give you just one cutoff date, typically 2 to 4 weeks out from your event, of when you need to fulfill the rooms that you're committing to. But some will do a checkpoint method. And that means that there's certain checkpoints throughout the year that you have to meet with your room block. And if you don't, you have to pay the remaining balance to the resort. There was one time I was throwing an event, I didn't really know this until a couple weeks before the cutoff date was upon us, and we were short about $100,000. So we had to do a massive push to get everybody in to book rooms, and it was super stressful. So when you're creating your room block contract, I would highly advise you to negotiate in just one cutoff date, like 2 to 4 weeks out from your event. And you need to know that if you do not fulfill this room block, you will have to pay the difference. So if, like I said with my example, if you're $100,000 short when the room block date hits, you have to pay that resort for all of those rooms you didn't fill. So it really sets you up for a pretty big liability. But if you're confident in selling tickets to your event, that shouldn't be an issue. And typically you only have to hit about 80% of your room block to be relieved of all of your liability. I definitely don't think these risk factors are enough to keep you from getting a room block for your event. Up next is that resorts typically help you out with your event. Now, like I said with convention centers, they typically only offer you the shell of the event and they kind of leave you on your own for everything else. However, with my experience in resorts, they have a lot of staff on hand that can help you out with branding, with food and beverage, with security, with managing the flow of the crowd, with setting up the room, and almost anything else that you need help with. This is really convenient because it's nice to have everything under one roof. When you hire a bunch of contractors, it's nice to have them in your network and to build those relationships, but having everything under the same roof, all within the resort, is really nice because you only have 1 or 2 contacts that you have to deal with the entire time. If you wanted to, you could use everything through the resort. You could use their audio visual, you could use their food and beverage, you could use their branding, you could use everything that they offer you. Yes, this will usually be pretty expensive, so I usually pick and choose what I use from the resort for my events. But like I said, it's just nice to have it all there in one place. Also, these people that are helping you out with your event work at the resort, so they know exactly what they're doing. This is their home ground, so they know where to put the branding, they know where to set your food and beverage, they know how to set your room. They know all of this because they have done it 100 times in the exact same place. If you hire a contractor to come in, it's likely that it's their first or second time working at the venue, so they might not be that familiar with it. The last pro I'll mention for resorts is the on-site food, shops, restaurants, etc. This is extremely convenient, especially if you don't want to spend a ton of money on food and beverage. A lot of resorts will have a couple restaurants on site for your attendees to eat at. They'll also have Starbucks, they'll have gift shops, they'll have little grocery stores for people to buy snacks and drinks. This is really convenient from the attendee perspective as well, because they don't have to go off site and go to all these different restaurants, 10 to 15 minutes away. They can just take the elevator up to the main floor and they can go to one of the restaurants and eat lunch. Now keep in mind, these restaurants probably won't be able to hold your entire attendee capacity. There was an event that we threw in Las Vegas where we had about 1,200 people in the room, and there were like 3 events on site. So 1,200 people cannot spread out evenly throughout 3 restaurants. So I do encourage you to still use food and beverage to feed your attendees, or at least let them know that they're either gonna be on their own for food or that they're gonna have to wait in long lines at the restaurants. But regardless of that, it's still really nice to have these restaurants on site because it gives your attendees a place to eat. That being said, it is still really nice to have these shops and restaurants and all this food on site. Because if you offer a little bit of food and beverage, some people will eat your food and beverage and some people will go to the restaurants. Or you can have private lunches for different people in your community and the rest can go get food at the restaurants. However you decide to break it up, you will see if you throw an event at a resort and then you throw one at a convention center, you will miss the restaurants, you'll miss the shops, and you'll miss the food that you have at a resort. At least I did. All right, moving on to the cons of resorts. Now the first con I want to talk about is resorts are typically more expensive to throw events. And this is pretty much all because of scarcity. When I mentioned that convention centers have dozens, sometimes even hundreds of event spaces available, resorts typically only have 2 to 3 ballrooms with 20 to 30 little meeting spaces that you can rent out. And with 52 weeks in the year, they can really only handle 52 large events in a calendar year. So if you want to throw an event at a resort, you should be trying to book it really far in advance. I know in one of my previous videos I said 12 to 15 months, but at a resort, to be safe, you could even start doing it above 15 months, maybe even 2 years out to be safe. Because there are a ton of resorts that I've reached out to for an event that we're throwing in a year and a half that's already booked out for the entire next year. And because there's so much scarcity and because so many people are trying to throw events at these resorts, they can really charge you top dollar to rent the space out. So if you're gonna throw an event at a resort, expect to pay a little bit more. Up next is the Wi-Fi and service is garbage. Now this just might have been a one-time experience, but the service at the convention center that I threw my event at was actually really good. I could send out texts and give calls to people from inside the meeting space. However, at pretty much every resort I've thrown an event at, they designed their ballrooms to block service out so that you have to pay for the Wi-Fi. And Wi-Fi is outrageously expensive at resorts, especially if you're throwing events of 1,000 people, 2,000 people, 3,000 people. You're gonna spend a ton of money on Wi-Fi. And this could just be a conspiracy, but I'm convinced that they designed their ballrooms to block service out so that you have to buy Wi-Fi. I can't prove this is just personal experience, but it kind of makes sense. It's a good way for them to make money off Wi-Fi. But just keep in mind when you're throwing an event at a resort, it's very likely that the service is gonna be terrible inside the ballroom, and you might have to buy Wi-Fi for your attendees. Now this next con is actually a backside of a pro I mentioned for resorts, which is sometimes you have to use their in-house contractors. Now I've never ran into the experience where I've had to use every single in-house contractor, but typically they'll make you use one of their partners that they use for food and beverage, for audio visual, or for branding. In most cases I've seen it be for audio visual, and that can be extremely expensive. So when you're reviewing your contract for a resort, make sure you look through all the in-house contractors you have to use, and make sure you get all those prices up front before you sign the contract, so you don't tie yourself into a bad situation. Now I hesitate to make this one a con, but it's important to reiterate, and that's if you have a room block at the resort, you are up for a lot of liability. Let's say you commit to fulfilling 250 rooms, and that's $200,000 of revenue for the resort. Technically, if nobody books a room in your room block, you're gonna have to pay them $250,000. So just know that when you're going into these contracts, that when you sign up for a room block, you're essentially committing to fulfilling these rooms, and if you don't fulfill them, you're gonna have to pay the resort, and the resort will get their money. I've had a few close calls of fulfilling room blocks, but luckily we've never had to cough up any money. But I'll tell you what, it makes you super stressed out when you have an upcoming cutoff date and you have not fulfilled your room block. So just make sure you do all of your due diligence and understand what you're signing when you sign these contracts. Now this final con I'm going to talk about, which is one I kind of already mentioned, and that's that the restaurants and the shops on site will not be enough for your attendees. Because you have to keep in mind, a lot of these resorts still have other people staying there, so they're going to be eating at these restaurants as well. Yes, it's convenient to have for overflow or for when people want to grab food in sessions, or maybe it's after hours, or if it's for breakfast, but you have to expect that all of your attendees will not be able to eat at these restaurants. And if you don't offer some sort of food and beverage to them, they're probably gonna be pretty upset. It is really expensive to pay for food and beverage for every single attendee, but at least providing them with some guidance and some information to go find food and beverage on their own is really gonna help their experience. But if you have the budget for it, the best way to create an event with just complete fluidity is to provide food and beverage for them as well. So they can show up to your event, they can attend the event, they can eat lunch at your event, they can go back to your event, they can eat dinner at your event, and they can go home. That keeps them there the entire time, and that creates hardly any friction along the entire process. However, like I said, that is pretty expensive. All right, I've listed out all the pros and cons for convention centers, and I've listed out all the pros and cons for resorts. Actually, not all of them. I'll probably make another video on this because there's a ton more, but that's enough for this video. But like I promised, I'm gonna say which one I prefer to throw events at, and that is, drumroll please, resorts. I think when you're throwing an event, having it at a resort creates an atmosphere that you just cannot create at a convention center. When you take over the resort, or when you have everybody on site, they can attend your event, they can go back up to their hotel room, and they can just come right back down to your event, that really makes a difference. In my opinion, if you're trying to curate the best experience for your attendees, I would highly recommend throwing your event at a resort. Now, like I said, there's a lot of other pros and cons I could have covered for both convention centers and resorts, and I'll probably make a follow-up video on this topic. But based off of everything I provided in this video, my personal favorite for throwing events is resorts. That being said, I'm probably gonna throw more events at convention centers. But like I said, there's still a ton of pros about throwing events at convention centers. But if I had to pick a favorite, it would definitely be resorts. Okay, that's all I got for this video. Thank you for watching, and if you could, hit the subscribe button, drop a comment down below if you wanna see me cover any topics in these videos. So really, if you wanna hear about something, please drop it down below and I'll look at it and I'll make a video on it. All right, that's all I got. I'll see you in the next video.